Thank you, Masami, and thank you to Ms. Yuko Nakashita for delivering the opening remarks. Thank you for inviting us in this event. My name is Yuyun Ismawati. I'm a co-founder and senior advisor of NEXUS3 Foundation, and I'm also the steering committee member of IPEN. Aileen will share the screen of our presentation. Thank you so much, Aileen. Okay, thank you, Aileen. I would like to share today some points about IPEN, and then Aileen will explain later about the plastic treaty. So the first explanation that I will share here is about IPEN, and then IPEN works on toxic chemicals and plastics, and also calls for chemicals management in plastics. And then to address the toxic chemicals issues in production and recycling, and also cover some of the studies conducted by IPEN network. Thank you. IPEN, as explained by Ms. Yuno before, IPEN is a global network of more than 600 NGOs in 120 countries. The leadership is a balance of NGOs leaderships from the global south and the global north. IPEN has 8 regional hubs, and Aileen and I are coming from the Southeast Asia and East Asia IPEN regional hub. IPEN headquarters is located in Sweden, and the operational office is in San Francisco. As I explained before by the previous speakers, that in various chemicals used in plastics, and studies shows that the production of plastics will be increasing rapidly until 2030, including the use of chemicals. As we know, the production of plastics to become a product, toys, or equipment will need chemicals to make the plastics functioning as the product. For instance, plasticizers or phthalates to make the plastic softer, or the addition of UV328 to make the plastics strong under the sun. And then another plastics are used to make plastic products in electronic gadgets have fireproof, and that's called the BFR, or bromoflame retardant. As mentioned earlier by during the opening, that currently the negotiation of plastic treaty address the plastics from upstream to downstream, and cover the life cycle of plastics. The UNEA resolutions actually address the plastic pollutions, including in marine environment, and cover the whole life cycle of plastic. But plastic pollution is not only the downstream or only happening when the plastic becoming waste. Plastic pollution starts from the beginning, since the extraction process. And because the chemicals additive used in plastics to make products being recycled globally, the toxic chemicals also being recycled or accumulated in the new product. And nowadays we heard more and more the definitions of circular economy. But circular economy, including circulating or recycling chemicals, is going to make a toxic circular economy. Next slide, please. UNEP report recently published before INC2 in Paris, explaining explaining and define the chemicals of concern in plastic. So scientists, there is a study conducted by scientists, many scientists, identified more than 16,000 chemicals are currently used in plastic production. But only 128 of these chemicals currently regulated globally. There are still big unknown about the characteristics and the impacts of these chemicals into human health and the ecosystem. Scientists define chemicals of concerns into various categories, but we identified also the chemicals of high concerns and the chemicals of low concerns. It's a different color. The orange one is the chemicals of high concerns, and then the bottom one is low concern, the green one. When scientists mention the chemicals of low concern used in plastics, it's not because the toxicity is lower than other chemicals, but because very low studies conducted. So we have no data, no information about the chemicals of low concern. Only small numbers of plastics currently being regulated, and mainly regulated under the Stockholm Convention. So from IPEN studies, we learned that plastics is the combinations of carbon and chemicals, and plastics expose toxics to human health throughout the life cycle, from baby's products to adult products. We found many evidence from various studies. I'm sorry, the slide is too much, but I just want to highlight it, that scientists also identified that there is no plastic chemicals classified as safe chemicals. And the study will be published in January 2021. And I explained before, plastics is carbon plus chemicals, and the chemicals used in plastics productions or as plastics additives are known as endocrine disruptor chemicals. So in many IPEN's activities on the ground involving a lot of IPEN participating organizations, we found out various results on the ground. For instance, from the upstream, we work with Professor Takada from the Pellet Watch to collect pellets from various beaches all over the world. There are lots of pellets from recycled plastics, or from, for instance, the event in Sri Lanka, where plastic pellets transported to Sri Lanka have accidents. So all the shipments of these pellets also distributed in the beach. And these pellets from all over the world containing toxic chemicals. And we also collected samples of products from various countries. All the reports can be accessed in the IPEN on the IPEN website. But I would like to present a couple of screenshots of reports that you can find. All the reports are available in English, and also some of them are in Spanish and other languages. But basically, all these reports are involving citizen science, where IPEN NGOs, IPEN participating organizations collecting samples of products from children's toys into kitchen utensils, and including other products that potentially made from recycled plastics. And we found high concentrations of flame retardants, PBDs, and other toxic chemicals. And at the downstream level, when plastic cannot be recycled, now plastic packaging has been proposed and promoted to be used as fuel, either in a form of refuse-derived fuel, or RDF, or being burned in the cement kiln or in coal-fired power plants. But because the system, the environmental monitoring standards, and also lack of enforcement. There is not enough control in environmental pollutions and emissions coming from these practices. And we found dioxins, high dioxin concentrations in eggs surrounding the area where plastic waste are burned. Slide, please. Yeah, some studies also has been published as the scientific paper. You can find these two examples of manuscripts or scientific paper that we published. The one at the bottom, I also co-authored that paper. And then the one on top was taken from a study using the products that we collected, showing that the recycled of plastics containing BFR also can be exposed to children, especially when they lick the toys, and the chemicals can be transferred into children's mouth. Yeah, so from several studies, we are convinced and confident that data and scientists shows that safe and circular plastics do not exist, because we found high concentrations of toxic chemicals in recycled products. And then also plastics poisons the circular economy from the upstream to the downstream stage. And we have to work with scientists to promote safe and circular plastics, but how to do it, we have to discuss it. Next slide, please. Yeah, I just want to show that we produce also several reports that you can access, and this one shows the evolution of plastic waste trade, not for recycling, but for fuel. And this is happening, the export was happening from many developed countries to our region.
Okay, so I'll there's a last slide. Okay, so thank you, Yuyun, for this presentation. No, where is it? Hold on. Okay, so good evening, everyone. Yuyun, there's a final slide.
You can
Okay, so
you can explain. Yeah.
Okay, so as Yuyun earlier mentioned, no, first and foremost, good evening everyone. I am Aileen Lucero. I came from the Philippines, from the Eco Waste Coalition, and thank you again for joining this learning session on plastic. So before I discuss what transpired on the INC3 in Nairobi, Kenya, I just want to reiterate what Yuyun, our earlier speaker mentioned. It's time to turn the tap off. Um, so the plastic issue has become the central point of the global attention, no? So what you see here is the timeline for the beginning 2017 to 2021 on how and what transpired having the international treaty to end plastic pollution. Yeah. For several years, the plastic pollution has been a major issue at the UN Environment Assembly, or what you call UNEA. No, so in 2017, UNEA 3 established an ad hoc and open-ended expert group on marine litter and microplastic, whose work concludes ahead of the UNEA 5 in 2021. Okay. So in December, in September 2021, in Geneva, Peru and Rwanda presented a draft resolution which gathered the support of more than 60 member states, and that and on March 22, 2022, 175 countries who is participating in UNEA 5.2 adopted the resolution 5 UNEA 5 in UNEA 5.2, the resolution to end plastic pollution toward an international legally binding instrument. And this UNEA 514 resolution specifies that the legally binding instrument on plastic should be based on a comprehensive approach that addresses the full life cycle of plastic, that should include both binding and voluntary approaches, and should take into account the Rio Declaration and national circumstances and capabilities. So, the global plastics negotiations. So, UNEA made history in March 2022 by adopting the resolution, which sets up the path to a global treaty to end plastic pollution. This is a highly ambitious work, no? Because they have to complete the work by the end of the 2024. The Intergovernmental Negotiating Committee is tasked with developing an internationally legally binding instrument on plastic pollution, including the marine environment. So, in November 28 to December 2, 2022, INC1 was conducted in Punta del Este, Uruguay. And then INC2 followed after months after it it convened in May to June 2023. And then the INC3, which was held in November in Nairobi, Kenya. In 2024, so next year, INC4 and INC5 will be conducted. No, so this is what is included in the UNEA 5 resolution that sets the ambition of completing the INC work by the end of next year. So what are the key points of a plastic treaty? So as reiterated by our previous speaker, we have to put in mind some of the points raised. Okay, so one is that plastic treaty is a global health treaty. Plastic pollution starts from the extraction stage to the end of life. Yeah. There are also lots of studies presented earlier that plastics pose hazards to human health throughout the entire life cycle of plastics, and that no safe and circular plastics really exist. Plastic degradation in terrestrial environment is also 6 times slower than in marine environment. So we all have to consider that as well. Given all of these considerations, what will the INC then consider? The INC should promote sustainable production and consumption of plastics, including product design, environmentally sound waste management, and through resource efficiency and circular economy approaches. They should also consider technical and capacity means of implementation, as well as address compliance and consider national action plans. Plastic pollution varies greatly from one country to the next, both in terms of social and impacts of plastic pollution, as well as financial and technical capacity to address this. That is why any global instrument should require a carefully designed mechanism to effectively address these challenges. The need for a scientific and socio-economic information should also be considered by the INC. That is why an effective treaty must be based in science, and it should be supported and has been an evidence base. So, but can all the member countries really do a strong and effective treaty? Because 175 nations agree to develop a legally binding agreement to combat plastic pollution. But what are they doing? As you could see in the picture, as the round of negotiations on a global plastic continues, a growing disagreement and splits among countries on scope, principles, and issues on whether it should be global or mandatory or voluntary or country-led grows rapidly. disagreements and tempers surged during the UN plastics meeting. So there are also questions, and the country-based agenda focused primarily on economic surface the negotiations, making the treaty a weakening obligations that is not effective at all in addressing the plastic crisis. So confusing as it is, UNEP also joined the wagon. No? In 2023, they published a report, Turning Off the Tap, wherein it presents how the world can end plastic pollution and create a circular economy. But it also promotes a business as usual scenario with the circularity it mentions. There is also an issue of conflict of interest that surfaced in every INC plastic meetings. In the recent INC3, there are 143 fossil fuel and chemical industry lobbyists registered for INC3, which is a 36% increase from INC2. So many of those are industry lobbyists attending the conference to end plastic pollution. But despite all of these challenges, IPEN adapted and engaged even in the plenary and contact groups. We influence, lobby inside and outside the plenary. IPEN provides science-based study with the vulnerable sectors and case study presented. IPEN and its participating organization members from all regions serves as the voice of the people coming from their country, from the workplace, the communities, the dump sites and landfills, all of the vulnerable affected sectors. In this slide, I want to emphasize that IPEN recognizes the important role of all stakeholders from the entire life cycle of plastics. Thus, I again put the life cycle of plastics in here, but identified all the stakeholders that IPEN is also working on. So IPEN recognized the significant contribution made by workers under informal and cooperative settings to collecting, sorting, and recycling plastics in many countries. It encourages action by all stakeholders to work together and form a multi-stakeholder action agenda, building from their own initiatives. Now on INC3. So INC3 marks the scheduled midpoint in the negotiations, and it is the first time that negotiators will turn to treaty text. So there is a zero draft. The zero draft has 10 placeholders that discusses issues like preamble, definitions, principles, scopes. It also talk about the reduction in the production of primary plastic, the elimination of polymers and chemicals of concern, and the transparency measures that include labeling mechanisms and just transition. So there are 3 contact groups that has been established to review the zero draft. And the contract group 1 address part 1 and part 2, which includes the scope of the zero draft. Contact group 2 focuses on part 3 and part 4. And then contact group 3 deal with elements not covered in sessions, including others principles, scopes, and definitions, and the intersessional work. So member states while negotiating may first agree to choose either of the options and then start negotiating on the text and annexes and propose for the next draft, which will be consolidated later for INC4. So there are 3 good and not so good outcomes in the recent INC3. And that is 1. Member states made interventions on the different provisions in the zero draft. The comments were compiled to one consolidated text for the different provisions, and then it will be used by the INC4 to be made available by the INC Secretariat at the end of this month. Also, the not so good is that there was a lack of agreement. So no agreements has been reached on intersessional work until after INC4, despite being very close to the agreement on intersessional work on chemicals. So they did not agree on anything for intersessional work. Another outcome of INC3 is the election of a new chair, which is Ambassador Bayas from Ecuador. As I end my presentation, I would like to leave these key messages and recommendations based on what our Miss Yuyun Ismawati presented also earlier for everyone to ponder. First, we need a strong and ambitious global plastic treaty to be able to address plastic pollution and planetary boundaries. So join us, adopt global controls on plastic, call on the industry and duty bearers to reduce the productions of plastics and chemicals of concern and eliminate hazardous plastic chemicals. Remember, it is time to tap off the tap. Thank you very much.